Mountain man married obese. Amish girl as a bet. On wedding night, she shocked him. Pour yourself a strong cup of coffee and prepare for the most powerful story of redemption and unexpected love ever told in the American frontier. This tale will take you through cruel mockery, mountain sanctuary, and the triumph of authentic character over shallow prejudice, proving that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most broken circumstances. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories where genuine hearts see worth beyond appearance. Prepare for this inspiring journey of transformation, faith, and the miracle of true acceptance. Blue Nugget Saloon, Wyoming Territory, harsh winter, 1886. When mountain man Elijah Vance drunkenly married Amish girl Hannah Schmidt on a cruel $100 bet. He expected tears and accusations, but on their wedding night, her quiet dignity and unshakable faith would shock him into recognizing the woman he'd actually won. She was Hannah Schmidt, 23, and forsaken an Amish girl whose past shame had driven her west, but not broken her spirit. He was Elijah Vance, 34, and scarred a mountain man whose own wounds had taught him to see beyond surface judgments eventually. Their unlikely union would unfold through one transformative season of healing and growth, proving that sometimes God's greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected circumstances when hearts choose courage over convenient cruelty. Wyoming Territory in 1886 was unforgiving frontier, where Amish refugees faced cultural persecution while mining communities created additional barriers through systematic harassment of those who appeared different or vulnerable. Saloon culture enabled systematic humiliation of vulnerable individuals, while gambling with human dignity represented moral corruption that authentic Christian witness could challenge when spiritual conviction overcame social pressure. Mountain homesteads provided sanctuary for society's outcasts, while healing traditional knowledge from Amish communities could serve broader frontier populations when isolation enabled authentic service transcending cultural boundaries. Community bullies, like corrupt miners, could exploit social prejudices, while legal corruption required individual courage and collective resistance when conventional protection proved inadequate against systematic intimidation and economic exploitation. 23-year-old Hannah had endured Amish community shunning after bearing child outside marriage while maintaining spiritual strength despite personal tragedy when infant died after 3 days, creating profound grief and social exile. Her experience with religious persecution while preserving Christian faith had developed exceptional resilience and healing knowledge when personal suffering had enabled empathy for other outcasts facing similar systematic rejection. Despite vulnerable position as cultural refugee and social outcast, she possessed genuine spiritual wisdom and healing abilities that frontier community would recognize when authentic Christian service transcended denominational boundaries. 34-year-old Elijah had retreated to mountain solitude after facial scarring, while personal trauma had created defensive barriers that alcohol temporarily numbed, but Christian witness could permanently heal through authentic relationship development. His experience with appearance-based rejection while frontier survival skills had developed capacity for recognizing authentic character when mountain challenges required substance over surface appeal for successful partnership formation. Despite scarred appearance and isolated lifestyle, he possessed authentic protective instincts and spiritual hunger that caring for rejected woman would fulfill when shared challenges created opportunity for mutual healing through Christian marriage bonds. Their relationship faces systematic community persecution, while healing ministry attracts both grateful recipients and hostile opposition, requiring spiritual courage and collective resistance, when individual faith must expand into community Christian witness for successful protection. Elijah's drunken acceptance of Silas Croft's cruel bet involved systematic humiliation of vulnerable woman, while gambling with human dignity created immediate spiritual conviction about moral wrongness despite monetary temptation and social pressure. Hannah's desperate acceptance of marriage arrangement involved recognizing survival necessity while maintaining spiritual dignity, created opportunity for authentic Christian witness, despite degrading circumstances requiring faith rather than conventional romantic expectations. Physical arrangements in cheap boarding room created awkward intimacy, while spiritual conversation about marriage vows created foundation for authentic relationship development despite unconventional origins requiring Christian commitment over social convention. Neither expected romantic attachment to develop when Elijah's immediate guilt, while Hannah's quiet Christian grace, created natural spiritual partnership despite gambling origins requiring divine intervention rather than human romantic strategy. Elijah's recognition of Hannah's genuine Christian character, while her acceptance of his scarred appearance created mountain sanctuary opportunity that both individuals needed when spiritual calling transcended social pressure. Trust developed through Elijah's mountain survival skills, while Hannah's Amish domestic expertise created comprehensive homestead system that individual efforts couldn't achieve when Christian partnership required collaborative resource management for successful frontier living. Hannah's recognition of mountain sanctuary potential, while Elijah's appreciation for her spiritual wisdom created mutual understanding about divine purpose that social humiliation had temporarily obscured through systematic persecution requiring authentic Christian witness. Their collaboration during homestead improvement and spiritual devotions while managing mountain property created opportunities for authentic relationship development based on shared faith rather than conventional romantic arrangements requiring Christian commitment over social expectations. Physical comfort evolved through appropriate Christian domestic partnership and shared spiritual responsibilities, with both experiencing chosen family connection that previous isolation had prevented when mountain environment enabled authentic relationship development without community judgment. The breakthrough occurred when community persecution, while healing ministry opportunities, created crisis requiring their combined Christian witness and frontier survival skills, when individual resistance proved insufficient against systematic harassment targeting Christian families. Hannah's traumatic Amish shunning made trust difficult, while Elijah's scarring created emotional barriers when both needed healing time that external persecution threatened to prevent through systematic social and economic pressure. Silas Croft's systematic harassment created external threat, while community mockery required Christian resistance that individual couples couldn't provide through conventional responses requiring spiritual warfare and community support. Most challenging was Amish Christian cultural differences. While mountain isolation demanded choosing between individual spiritual safety and community service, when Christian obligation required risking personal security for collective spiritual welfare. Community prejudice against unconventional marriage, while systematic intimidation threatened to eliminate Christian witness, requiring immediate spiritual response that individual resources couldn't provide when persecution needed collective Christian resistance rather than individual defensive measures for successful spiritual protection. Through months of mountain Christian living, Elijah's protective guidance, while Hannah's Amish spiritual wisdom created comprehensive Christian community that conventional marriages couldn't achieve. When combined, faith experience enabled both individual healing and community ministry for frontier families. Their coordination during spiritual devotions while managing homestead responsibilities created natural Christian partnership that traditional arrangements couldn't match. When shared spiritual duty enabled mutual respect and authentic Christian marriage bonding transcending conventional categories. Most significantly, their relationship demonstrated that authentic Christian marriage could provide superior spiritual foundation rather than mere convenience. When genuine spiritual compatibility transcended cultural differences for achieving comprehensive Christian service and mutual fulfillment. The transformation occurred when Hannah's herbal healing knowledge, while Elijah's mountain resources created gradual community acceptance that religious prejudice had initially prevented. When authentic Christian service demonstrated spiritual character rather than cultural performance. Their participation in community healing ministry while maintaining Christian dignity created slow recognition that unconventional marriage provided community benefit when individual spiritual demonstration challenged existing religious categories and cultural prejudices. Their most profound growth involved learning to serve Christian community while defending marriage spiritual bonds when both required courage for protecting vulnerable Christian arrangement despite social pressure demanding conventional religious categories. Hannah and Elijah's coordination during community harassment, while their unified Christian response to systematic intimidation created comprehensive spiritual defense that individual resistance couldn't provide when persecution required collective Christian witness. Their systematic use of Christian allies while maintaining spiritual standing created resistance network that community exploitation couldn't overcome. When authentic Christian relationships provided foundation for collective spiritual defense and community protection. Most importantly, their Christian marriage demonstrated that authentic spiritual partnership could enable community ministry rather than individual focus when shared. Christian purpose transcended personal concerns for achieving collective Christian welfare and spiritual protection. Christian community survival became threatened when Silas Croft's harassment escalated to systematic persecution, while corrupt mining interests created economic pressure requiring immediate Christian resistance that individual families couldn't provide through conventional responses. Economic complications emerged when systematic harassment, while community intimidation created potential business elimination through coordinated persecution, requiring professional intervention and community Christian support. Professional investigation became necessary when harassment attracted territorial attention, while systematic intimidation required effective documentation that local authorities couldn't provide through conventional investigation methods requiring Christian community organization. Most dangerously, Croft's coordination of mining harassment, while his systematic corruption required elimination of Christian resistance before community exploitation could be completed successfully through violent intimidation. Religious authority became involved when Christian community moral crisis demanded spiritual leadership, while systematic persecution required collective Christian response that individual families couldn't coordinate without church organization and mutual support. Social pressure intensified when systematic harassment, while community manipulation created artificial moral crisis, requiring immediate Christian community action for successful spiritual resistance against organized persecution requiring divine intervention. Hannah's evolution from shamed Amish refugee to Christian community healer reflected authentic spiritual character's triumph over religious persecution, while crisis revealed ministry strength that cultural shunning had temporarily suppressed. when community survival required genuine rather than performed Christian response. Her willingness to risk personal safety for Christian community welfare showed growth from individual survival to spiritual leadership, when others' welfare required courage despite potential retaliation from corrupt forces threatening entire Christian community. Elijah learned that mountain marriage required community engagement, while systematic persecution demanded choosing collective Christian resistance over individual security, when authentic Christian calling required personal risk for spiritual community protection. Together they discovered that authentic Christian marriage provided superior foundation for community ministry rather than creating individual focus, when shared spiritual purpose enabled effective resistance against external threats requiring collective action for successful protection against systematic persecution, targeting vulnerable Christian families through coordinated harassment. The crisis exploded when Croft's systematic persecution escalated to public humiliation in church, while Hannah's past shame became weapon for destroying Christian witness through coordinated community attack, requiring desperate spiritual resistance and authentic Christian courage. "This Amish whore corrupts our community with her shameful past," Croft declared, while presenting manufactured evidence to assembled congregation. "And this scarred mountain hermit's perverted marriage threatens Christian values, requiring immediate community action for moral purification." Hannah's recognition that Christian witness required public testimony, while her shameful past might eliminate credibility, created devastating choice between personal protection and spiritual warfare, when authentic Christian leadership demanded risking individual reputation despite vulnerability. The situation felt catastrophic when public exposure, while systematic persecution, created existential threat that conventional Christian response couldn't overcome, when community authorities seemed corrupted by economic interests despite spiritual obligations. Most crushing was immediate recognition that Christian community acceptance had been slowly developing, while systematic attack threatened to destroy authentic spiritual relationships that religious prejudice had prevented, but Christian service had enabled through mutual respect. Unable to remain silent while witnessing systematic destruction of Christian witness, Hannah battled between self-protection instincts and spiritual obligation, when public confession might expose her to greater persecution, but silence would enable collective spiritual destruction. Her recognition that past shame was less important than current Christian witness, while authentic faith required moral courage, created understanding that individual reputation was secondary to collective spiritual welfare, requiring personal risk despite vulnerability. She used prayer relationships and Christian knowledge to organize spiritual resistance while preparing for public testimony that might provide divine authority necessary for successful community defense, when authentic Christian voice could challenge systematic persecution. Unable to protect wife while facing systematic destruction of Christian witness through coordinated persecution, Elijah confronted choice between individual mountain security and collective spiritual warfare, when isolation couldn't provide adequate protection against organized attack. His growing understanding that authentic Christian marriage required community engagement while individual survival depended on collective spiritual resistance, created recognition that personal safety was connected to Christian community welfare, requiring shared spiritual risk. Most difficult was accepting community Christian leadership role while maintaining protective instincts, when collective spiritual action required risking personal resources and safety, despite preference for mountain independence, requiring external Christian support. When Hannah chose public Christian testimony, while Elijah supported community spiritual resistance despite personal risk, Authentic spiritual courage triumphed over systematic intimidation when divine authority enabled effective resistance against community persecution. Their alliance as Christian community protectors, rather than individual survivors, marked triumph of collective spiritual welfare over personal safety, while proving that authentic Christian leadership could overcome systematic corruption when divine truth provided foundation for successful spiritual resistance. The climactic church confrontation required entire community to witness ultimate spiritual warfare, while Hannah's courageous testimony about God's redemption and documented evidence of Croft's corruption provided comprehensive proof of authentic Christian witness versus systematic persecution. Standing together before assembled congregation while presenting evidence of spiritual transformation and community service, Hannah and Elijah represented triumph of authentic Christian character over systematic persecution when divine grace proved superior to human condemnation. My past shame cannot be hidden. Hannah testified while presenting comprehensive documentation of Christian service and healing ministry. But God's redemption transforms every broken life into vessels for His glory, and authentic Christian witness serves community welfare rather than enabling systematic persecution through false moral righteousness. Elijah's testimony demonstrated protective character. Individual mountain security means nothing without Christian community welfare, and authentic spiritual partnership represents divine purpose rather than human convenience when genuine believers create lasting prosperity through mutual Christian support. Community witnesses, including grateful healing recipients and Christian allies, provided comprehensive testimony about spiritual transformation, while systematic corruption evidence demonstrated that false moral accusations couldn't eliminate authentic Christian witness through persecution or intimidation. Most importantly, their successful defense established community precedent for recognizing authentic Christian witness through spiritual fruit rather than past condemnation, while demonstrating that genuine spiritual transformation could overcome systematic persecution when collective Christian resistance provided foundation for divine protection. Croft's exposure, while community recognition of Christian authenticity, provided framework that systematic persecution couldn't overcome when divine truth transcended human judgment through documented spiritual service and community transformation. Their successful Christian victory influenced Wyoming territorial approaches to religious freedom, while establishing framework for protecting Christian witness when serving collective spiritual welfare rather than enabling systematic persecution through false moral authority. Croft's moral defeat, while community recognition of authentic Christian marriage represented triumph of divine grace over systematic condemnation, when territorial recognition enabled spiritual achievement despite persecution and intimidation attempts. Community celebration of Christian witness, while territorial support for spiritual freedom created environment where authentic Christian achievement would enhance rather than threaten collective welfare through continued spiritual community leadership. Religious blessing of redeemed Christian marriage, while pastoral authority, recognition of spiritual transformation provided foundation for lasting relationship stability when authentic Christian love had enabled effective community protection rather than individual advancement. Hannah's continued healing ministry, while married partnership with Elijah, enabled expanded territorial Christian service through proven spiritual character rather than systematic condemnation when collaborative relationships served broader Christian welfare. Their expanded mountain homestead, designed to provide Christian community gathering center while maintaining prosperous operation, became territorial model for inclusive spiritual development that honored both individual achievement and collective Christian welfare. Elijah's restoration to community Christian leadership, while Hannah's development as territorial spiritual advocate demonstrated that authentic Christian marriage could enhance rather than limit individual potential when genuine spiritual partnership provided foundation for community Christian ministry. Most significantly, their marriage had evolved from gambling situation to authentic Christian partnership that proved genuine spiritual relationships could provide superior foundation for territorial Christian development when collaborative ministry transcended individual advancement. Hannah and Elijah's happiness was visible to everyone who observed their transformation in their effective Christian community leadership and authentic marriage, their inclusive approach to territorial spiritual development, and their shared commitment to demonstrating that divine grace mattered more than past mistakes. Their successful resistance to systematic persecution influenced territorial approaches to Christian freedom while establishing framework for recognizing authentic spiritual witness through divine grace rather than past condemnation when serving collective Christian welfare. Spiritual impact spread through their inclusive Christian methods, while their experience became model for territorial communities seeking effective approaches to systematic persecution requiring collective Christian resistance rather than individual defensive measures. Cultural precedents from their case helped establish territorial understanding about authentic Christian witness, transcending past shame while supporting spiritual transformation when serving community Christian development rather than maintaining systematic condemnation. Their story became teaching example throughout Wyoming Territory about effective Christian resistance while demonstrating how authentic spiritual witness could overcome systematic persecution when collective Christian action transcended individual survival for achieving territorial spiritual justice. Christian community development followed their model of redemptive spiritual witness while building comprehensive approaches to persecution that welcomed authentic transformation rather than maintaining systematic condemnation through false moral authority. Territorial authorities recognized their witness as example of appropriate Christian response to systematic persecution, while their continued territorial prosperity influenced territorial policies supporting Christian transformation over condemnation. Their advocacy work influenced territorial legislation regarding Christian freedom and spiritual witness, while their homestead remained model for territorial regions seeking effective approaches to Christian development that honored both individual transformation and collective spiritual welfare. 20 years later, Wyoming statehood Christian culture included comprehensive spiritual transformation and community protection provisions that historians trace directly to precedents established by their successful choice of authentic Christian witness over systematic religious condemnation. Their Christian community traditions continued demonstrating successful redemptive ministry for 4 generations, with residents learning that divine grace transcended past shame, while their story remained inspiration for choosing Christian transformation over systematic spiritual condemnation when serving individual and collective Christian welfare. Within 2 years of their spiritual victory, 4 other Wyoming Territory communities successfully integrated redemptive Christian witness, inspired by Hannah and Elijah's model of choosing divine grace over past condemnation when systematic persecution required Christian community cooperation rather than individual defensive measures. Their approach became regional example of Christian resilience, while demonstrating that systematic condemnation could be overcome through authentic spiritual witness and divine transformation, rather than individual submission to religious persecution and social intimidation. Spiritual benefits spread as their redemptive Christian methods influenced territorial policies, supporting spiritual freedom, while their experience attracted territorial attention to authentic transformation requiring recognition rather than systematic condemnation. Their story influenced territorial Christian customs by proving that divine grace could overcome any past shame when supported by collective Christian community acceptance rather than individual religious positioning requiring systematic exclusion of transformed believers. Their Christian community integration influenced territorial legislation protecting spiritual transformation, while establishing comprehensive framework for recognizing authentic Christian witness through divine grace, rather than past condemnation when serving collective Christian welfare. Religious programs based on their redemptive methods influenced territorial approaches to Christian community development, while their experience became model for communities throughout American West seeking effective responses to systematic persecution requiring collective rather than individual Christian solutions. Cultural precedents from their case helped establish territorial framework for Christian freedom that recognized spiritual transformation advantages while supporting authentic witness when serving territorial Christian development rather than maintaining systematic condemnation. Their successful Christian cooperation influenced federal approaches to territorial religious oversight, while demonstrating that Christian community unity could enhance, rather than threaten individual prosperity, when authentic spiritual service provided superior outcomes to systematic persecution. 25 years later, Wyoming Christian organizations included comprehensive spiritual transformation and community protection programs that officials traced directly to precedents established by their successful choice of divine grace over systematic religious condemnation. Their relationship evolved from gambling arrangement to authentic Christian partnership characterized by mutual support and deepening spiritual commitment that impressed territorial residents and Christian leaders alike. Both individuals' transformation from social outcasts to respected Christian leaders while building redemptive marriage demonstrated healing power of choosing divine grace over past condemnation. They built extended Christian community, understanding that authentic marriage transcended past shame, while their homestead became model for territorial communities that valued spiritual transformation alongside individual achievement. In later years, both remained devoted Christian leaders whose partnership continued inspiring others. True love emerges through divine grace when hearts choose spiritual transformation over past condemnation, proving that God's most beautiful relationships are gifts of redemption when authentic Christian character conquers every shame. If this story of redemptive Christian marriage and mountain transformation warmed your heart, like this video, subscribe for more inspiring frontier faith dramas and share your thoughts below. Sometimes God's most beautiful love stories begin with the most broken circumstances, and the most powerful Christian marriages are those that prove divine grace conquers every shame. Here's to all the hearts that chose redemption over condemnation and proved that authentic Christian love transforms gambling debt into kingdom treasure.